Hello. So our topic today is Victorian morality. Now you may have heard this term somewhere or the other, Victorian morality, and this is specially for our country because Victorian morality still exists today in our country because of the colonial hangover. Now, if you do a small recap about the previous lectures, I had told you that while the imperial expansion happened under Queen Victoria, India was one of the colonies of the British, and Queen Victoria herself was the Empress of India, as it said. And it is for that, because of a lengthy colonial rule, a lengthy imperial rule by the British, that our country and its people do suffer from this colonial hangover. And Victorian morality still exists in a way in our country. For example, the attitude towards women, the attitude towards other gender, and women being brought under the lens of chastity, women being brought under the speculation of how her character is based on what she indulges in, how she dresses. And another thing might be this children of Indian families expected to adhere to some unquestioned obedience to their parents. And in many other ways, Victorian morality still exists here in many forms and in many ways. So, some of these might be very relatable to our lives actually, but the topic of our discussion today is not how Victorian morality still exists in our country, but rather what Victorian morality is and how it existed in Britain during the 19th century, and how Victorian morality and its characters are reflected in the two poetry that are in our syllabus. So, with that, we start our topic today. Now, what is Victorian morality? Morality, as you know, it's kind of the ethics, the morals, and the code of conduct, which were a set of rigid rules and which had very strictly implemented in the 19th century Britain. Now, it is very difficult, let me tell this at the beginning, it is very difficult to actually pin down who created this moral climate in 19th century Britain. For one, morality as a whole in society was controlled largely by religion, and by religion I mean the church and the clergy of the church till before the Victorian age. But as you know, religion had its own share of decline in the Victorian period because of the rise of science. So, who created this Victorian morality is very difficult to say. Many critics and historians have pointed out that Victorian morality was largely the morality of the middle class that existed in this time. So that can be one of the interpretation. So it's many things actually what created this, and of course what I believe is that there was some support of the authority too, of the higher class, so that this mentality can actually perpetuate in the society. So it's very difficult to say who actually created or propagated this moral climate in Victorian Britain. So what is Victorian morality? It comes down to this one thing about what is right and what is wrong, and you'll see this it still exists in our society. Our teachers practice it, our parents practice it, all the authorities of our society practice it, and this is something centering which the laws of the legal system of our country, the social fabric of our country, and many things are the parental control, and many things are our manners, and everything is centering around this one rule rather of what is right and what is wrong. And this thing about what is right and what is wrong actually extends itself to like everything, it may be in speech, about what is the right speech and what is the wrong speech, what is the right behavior and what is a wrong behavior, what is the right way to dress and appear, what is the wrong way to dress and appear, what is the right attitude, what is a wrong attitude, and of course what is the right approach to sexuality and what is a wrong approach to sexuality. So everything in Victorian Britain was being controlled by this rigid set of rules and laws, ethics and moral codes about what is right and what is wrong. And all of these was to demonstrate that Victorians had a higher sense of morality. This is a kind of holier than thou morality that you will find in people all around you. So it started from here, and this Victorian men and women, they wanted this Victorian society, they wanted that to demonstrate this higher sense of morality, and that is why Victorian morality exists. Now, what were the most important values in this Victorian morality? The one was hard work. Everyone was expected to work hard, and this also was backed up by this contemporary industrialization of Britain, which needed people to work hard and give in their best in everything they do in their life. They worked hard in factories, they worked hard in whatever profession they were in, and there was a sense of duty and responsibility. Now this came in many forms. You had your duties and responsibilities to yourself. You had I go the other way around. The first sense of duty and responsibility should be for your nation, that is Britain, and for the monarch, the queen. The second set of responsibility is for your society. You should be dutiful and responsible for your society. The third is you should be dutiful and responsible for your family, and also lastly yourself. And there, in everything you do, there should be a strict sense of honesty in whatever you do. That's one of the main values. Whatever you do, you should do honestly, and there is absolutely no tolerance to any form of crime in any way. And another very important value that Victorian practice is a part of Victorian morality is the sexual restraint. You are not supposed to indulge in any form of sexual excesses, and your sexuality, your approach to sexuality should be very restrained in a way. We'll go in detail about this later. And Victorian people as a whole had a very strict and stern demeanor. Means they were very serious people. They were not the happy-go-lucky type of people. They were not joking around. They were not playful. They were serious for most of the times. They were very stern in their appearance and behavior and everything. So these are the most important values, most well-known values that are there in the Victorian morality, Victorian set of conduct. Now, as you know, whenever a set of rules are imposed on a society, it is the women who are far more pinned down in that moral obligation. So next we have the Victorian Ideal, and this was a code of conduct specifically specifying how a proper woman should behave. Now, what is a proper woman? And there was a set of rules which you had to follow, which women had to follow to actually be considered a proper woman in Victorian society. Now, a respectable woman in a Victorian society should be beautiful, and she should be classy, elegant, polite, and perhaps most importantly, sexually restrained. Now, this again, sexual restraint was for both men and women, but it was the law was more severely implemented for women, because we see some exceptions when it comes to men, because when women were supposed to be faithful and sexually restrained and practice chastity, practice monogamy, we see in some literature Victorian men sneaking out at the nearest prostitute area. So this again has its own set of compromise and contradictions, but woman in any society, in any morally bound society, has a greater moral obligation. It was forced upon them far more than it was forced upon men. And this set of the Victorian ideal woman, the angel in the house, was supported by etiquette and manners, and manner books were very popular among women. Now, women could get education, formal education, if they wanted to, but it was not really appreciated. Men should be educated, women should stay at home. And whether or not women actually got formal education, it was very important for them to be educated in these with these manner books, so that they know the proper etiquette and manners to be the ideal wife, a proper woman who is a proper wife. So that is the Victorian ideal. Next up, we have the concept of the Victorian family, which you can say is a subset of a subtopic of this lecture about Victorian morality. Now, as I said, the Victorian man or the Victorian people, for both the Victorian man and the Victorian woman, the values of home and the values of family is very fundamental to their social being. Now, they were, of course, as I said, they had to do their duty and responsibility towards the family, but this was again very gendered. Like for the man, the duty and responsibility towards a family for a man would be to actually go out to earn the daily bread, to actually manage the world outside. While for a woman, she was expected to stay at home. She was supposed to raise the children and do the household chores. And when the Victorian man comes back from work, he should be welcomed by a proper, proper house, proper home. And the Victorian woman was responsible to actually construct what you may call a proper home and proper family. So duty and responsibility towards family was very gendered in the Victorian times. Now, what was the family structure in Victorian Britain? Now, it was strict heterosexual monogamy that had to be followed. Now, two words are very important here. One is heterosexual and the other is monogamy. Now, heterosexual, as you know, heterosexual is man, woman, and of course, the idea of gender in Victorian times was often equated with the idea of sex. Gender was exactly the sex that was assigned at birth. So there was only man and woman. There is no scope of any third gender or any other genders beside man and woman. And a heterosexual relationship is a relationship between a man and a woman. Man and woman. And what is monogamy? Monogamy is one man being married to one woman. So heterosexual monogamy, monogamy is actually one person being married to one person. But because it is heterosexual monogamy, the only possible combination of a Victorian family is one man marrying one woman, having a relationship with one woman and producing kids with that woman only. So there is no scope of extramarital affairs. There is no scope of a relationship that involves more than two people. So it's only man woman, that is relationship, and they should be bound together by some kind of holy matrimony. So there is no scope of man woman, and there is no scope of woman man and any other combinations as such. So only strict heterosexual monogamy was to be followed, and that is the only family structure allowed in Victorian morality. Now, how did a family unit exist? A family unit consists of an authoritarian father, a very strict Victorian man who is the authoritarian father, and a submissive woman who shouldn't say anything, just follow orders of the authoritarian father, and disciplined children who should probably listen to both. So this was the family unit in Victorian times, and this family structure and this family unit was best suited to propagate this idea of Victorian morality. Now, why am I saying all this about Victorian morality? Because I find reflections of these traits of Victorian morality in the poems from your syllabus. Now, as I said, the most important right and wrong is speech, behavior, dress, and appearance and attitude. These Victorian people should have the right speech, the right behavior, the right appearance, and the right attitude. And when Ulysses say that I cannot rest from travel, I will bring life to the lees. Remember, this is exactly what Victorians wanted from its people, to actually live a life of activity, a whole life of activity. So the right speech, an authoritarian Ulysses delivering a right speech, he is the king, and with a right behavior that he wants to go out again, and that suits the Victorian spirit of the spirit of Victorian age. The right appearance of a king, a stern tall warrior coming back from the Trojan War, gives Ulysses the right appearance and the right attitude, because he doesn't leave his subjects like that. He wants to go out again, because Victorianism is about an endless activity all through life. That is the spirit of the Victorian age. But he is responsible also, so he actually makes his son Telemachus the king, because he believes that Telemachus will be able to rule his subjects. So that makes Ulysses a representative of the Ulysses a representative Victorian for that matter. So the next one is the most important values that were appreciated in Victorians. That is hard work, duty and responsibility, and honesty. I find reflections of these values in these lines from Tennyson's Ulysses again. This is when Ulysses introduces his son Telemachus, and Ulysses says that Telemachus will be a good king. This is my son, mine own Telemachus, to whom I leave the scepter and the isle. Scepter and the isle is, of course, symbols of the ruler. By slow prudence, this is character of Telemachus, slow prudence, to make mild decisions in among rugged people, centered in the sphere of common duties, decent not to fail, and in offices of tenderness. This is Telemachus's. These are Telemachus's characteristics of hard work and responsibility and honesty, in tenderness, and that makes these Victorian character that has been found in Telemachus by Ulysses, that makes Telemachus fit to rule and makes Telemachus a good king. Now, Ulysses and Telemachus, they actually represents the two sides of Victorianism, and we'll of course do that when we do Ulysses as a poem. And the next one, I said that the values of home and the family is fundamental, and I talked about the duty and responsibility that someone has towards his family. And as you know, this again makes Tennyson's choice of the character of Ulysses perfect in the Victorian spirit, because Ulysses is very well known for his voyage back home to Ithaca after the Trojan War, and it takes 10 years for Ulysses to actually come back home. Although Tennyson's Ulysses, it starts from a little different perspective, because now Ulysses again wants to move out. But Ulysses, the original Ulysses, he is very well known for being want to come back at any cost. And this happens after many inventions and interventions and temptations, because he gets lost at sea, because Poseidon, the sea god, was unhappy with Ulysses. He was angry with Ulysses. And there were many other inventions, like there were some demons and all who kills his mariners, and he has a shipwreck, and many other interventions. If you read the Ulysses, you read Ulysses, you will find, and there are many other temptations as well, because there is this witch, or and yeah, this is this witch called Circe, whom Ulysses falls in love with, and he actually is very tempted towards this witch who is very beautiful. So this becomes a symbol of the Victorian man, that whenever he goes out for work, he actually has many interventions and many temptations to deal with. But this duty and responsibility towards one's family is what the Victorian man should consider at the end of the day. So, at the end of the day, wherever you have gone, whoever you have been with, you must come home back. You must come back home at the end of the day to actually fulfill your duty and responsibility towards your family. I think this makes the choice, Tennyson's choice about the character of Ulysses, very appropriate in this context. I also said about the family unit, so I have it written down here again. Now with the characters, now the authoritarian father is Ulysses. He is of course the king, and he is the warrior, the authoritarian figure, and this is a dramatic monologue where Ulysses is a dramatic monologue where only Ulysses speak and no other characters can speak. He speaks for his wife, he calls her an aged wife, and he orders Telemachus to be the king after him so that he could go on with his voyage. So he does what he wants. He is the authority, he orders, and everybody else should just follow the authoritarian father. So Ulysses fulfills this image of an authoritarian father. The next up we have the submissive mother, whom Ulysses called the aged wife Penelope. Now Penelope is classy, elegant, polite and sexually restrained also, because Penelope, on one hand, while Ulysses was known for his continued desire to actually return back home, Penelope on the other hand, who was staying back at home and nurturing the family, she was known for her fidelity to Ulysses when he was gone. Everybody said that Ulysses won't return, but Penelope didn't marry anyone else and he waited patiently for Ulysses. She hadn't been for anyone else. Now here he calls her the aged wife, and of course Ulysses is also aged here in this case, but Penelope actually was the original Penelope in Odysseus. She was not really a very submissive woman. She was very clever, or whatever you call it. She was she was able to take her own decisions. But here in Tennyson's Ulysses, Penelope, she doesn't have many mentions also. She doesn't have many lines. Ulysses doesn't spend many lines on her, and she plays the role of this submissive mother. Now she is only the aged wife, and she has no other functions apart from that. The next one is the disciplined child, and of course Telemachus is the disciplined child. He has this low prudence and he is decent not to fail in offices of tenderness, which makes him a fit ruler. And Telemachus is not supposed to say anything against Ulysses' decision when he says that he is going to be the king after Ulysses. Telemachus is just supposed to accept what the authoritarian father Ulysses say. So this family unit has also its reflections on Tennyson's Ulysses. Next on, we move a bit to Robert Browning, My Last Duchess, and here we have also reflections of the Victorian morality. Now in these lines, that she had a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whatever she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. Now, it means that the Duchess gives explanation that she was happy with everything. Like someone offers her cherries, she is happy about sunsets, she is happy about the mule she rides. She becomes happy about everything, and she concentrates on other things apart from her own domesticity, and apart from her own husband. And that was one of the complaints that the Duchess had, that she compliments her on her breasts and on her looks, but she is happy also about other things. So the last Duchess actually fails to become the ideal Victorian woman. And what happens to anyone, to any woman who fails to become the ideal Victorian woman? She is punished. There, she is disciplined and punished. And in this case, she had to be killed off because she had these flaws in her character and she doesn't quite fit this idea of the ideal Victorian woman. Now, this is also another example, the bough of cherries. Some officious fool broke in the orchard for her, and she receives this gift from some other person who is not her husband. And this breaks, of course, in symbolism, in a metaphor for breaking that monogamy. A wife is not supposed as if to receive any other gifts, to receive anything else from any man apart from her husband. She has, this last Duchess, she has flaws in her character when it comes to becoming the ideal Victorian woman, and that is why she had to be killed off. But to be honest, these ideas about the domesticity, the forced domesticity of the Victorian woman is more aptly represented in Tennyson's Lady of Shalott. So in that, if you read that poem, which I had already given to you in that PDF, you'll find more reflections in about this Victorian morality and how women were treated in Victorian age. So these are some of the interpretations that I think is important for the two poems that we have in our syllabus. And after this, we only have one topic left, which is the Victorian compromise, and we'll do that in the next lecture. So thank you.